This video is designed to assist in the installation of a new seal kit in a Salvajor Disposer. All repairs should be made according to local codes and by a qualified technician. Review the included instruction sheet before beginning installation. Use the seal kit contents sheet to identify the parts included in this kit. Small parts can be identified on the back of this sheet. It's possible that not all parts in this kit will be used for your model of disposer. Not all parts in the kit will be identical matches to the parts removed. Shut off power to the disposer at the electrical panel and then unhook the electrical connections and the drain plumbing from the disposer. Begin by removing the 8 bolts from the top housing, then remove the top housing and center gasket. For easier removal, the top housing can be left attached to the sink or cone bowl. Turn the unit upside down. Remove the junction box cover if it was not removed during removal of the disposer from the sink or cone. Remove the thermal overload cover. Remove the black rubber gasket over the thermal overload and pull the thermal overload out of its seat by pulling on the red button. Remove the O-ring and push the thermal overload back through the hole so that it is inside the bottom of the unit. Turn the unit back over. Remove the shredder by inserting a screwdriver in between the faceplate and the shredder and pry it out. It may be necessary to use 2 screwdrivers to remove the shredder as shown. Bend the tabs on the lock washer down and then remove the rotor nut and lock washer. Lift the faceplate off the motor shaft, remove the rotor shaft gasket and the rotor base. Please note, the rotor base might come off attached to the faceplate. If so, separate these parts as the rotor shaft gasket is located between these parts. Lay the unit on its side. Use a rubber mallet to strike the large threaded end of the motor shaft, driving out the bottom. Note, the motor rotor will come out with the bottom end bell assembly still attached. Next, remove the 4 screws in the top end bell insert. Turn the motor housing upside down and remove the top end bell insert by pushing it out from inside the motor barrel. After the insert is out, the tolerance ring and O-rings will also need to be removed if they did not come out with the insert. Using a long screwdriver, drive out the bottom vari-lip seal from the motor barrel side of the unit. Remove the cotter pin and castle nut from the bottom end bell assembly and remove the 4 washers. Use a rubber mallet to separate the bottom end bell assembly from the motor rotor. Once separated, remove the bottom seal bearing and the orange bottom end bell rubber isolator. You are now ready to install the new seal kit. Remove the new bottom vari-lip seal from the cardboard mandrel located in the bottom of the top end bell assembly. With the disposer housing upright, press the bottom vari-lip seal, open side up, into the bottom of the bearing pocket. The upper lip of the seal should be flush with the bottom of the bearing pocket. Place the tolerance ring into the bearing pocket and push out against the outer wall. Place 1 O-ring into the bottom of the bearing pocket and place the second O-ring around the bottom portion of the top end bell assembly. Push the cardboard mandrel to the top of the seal in the top end bell assembly. Assemble the top bearing cup cone. Then, press the pre-greased top bearing cup cone assembly into the top end bell assembly, being careful not to dislodge the cardboard mandrel. Note, the top bearing cup cone should go into the top end bell assembly so the cone taper the narrow side, faces down. Align the screw holes in the top end bell assembly with the holes in the bearing pocket and then tap the assembly into place. Make sure the cardboard mandrel stays in place and the tolerance ring remains against the outer wall of the bearing pocket. Tighten the 4 screws to secure assembly. Place a new O-ring on the larger end of the motor rotor shaft and a new O-ring on the smaller end in the slots provided. Insert the motor rotor shaft's larger threaded end into the disposer housing, making sure it bottoms out in the top bearing cup cone. Once the motor rotor shaft is in place, turn the disposer upright onto a prop, such as a block of wood, to assure it stays in the top bearing. Remove the cardboard mandrel from the top end bell assembly, then immediately place the rotor base on the motor rotor shaft and align the key slots. Once the rotor base is in place the keys into the slots until they bottom out. Insert the rotor shaft gasket in the center of the rotor base around the motor rotor shaft. Place the faceplate on top of the rotor base and align the tabs on the bottom for proper seating. Align the tab on the lock washer with the notch on the faceplate and install the lock washer. Install the rotor nut on the shaft and tighten until the rotor nut bottoms out completely and the faceplate is tight against the rotor base. Bend the tabs on the lock washer up with a screwdriver or pliers. Place the bottom end bell into the bottom of the disposer housing and line up the junction box opening in the bottom end bell with the junction box in the disposer housing. Carefully pull all the stator wires into the junction box, making sure you have not pinched any wires. Pull the thermal overload through the hole provided in the bottom end bell. Place the O-ring around the thermal overload and push it back into the bottom end bell hole. Tap the bottom end bell into place with a rubber mallet. Install the thermal overload cover and gaskets, securing them with the 2 bolts and washers. Insert the bottom end bell rubber isolator into the bottom bearing pocket of the bottom end bell. Place the bottom bearing over the motor rotor shaft and tap into the bearing pocket, making sure not to crimp the rubber isolator. Note, the bearing must seat completely in the bottom end bell. Place the drive washer, then the friction washer, over the threads on the motor rotor shaft and against the bottom bearing. Next, place the wavy washer over the shaft and locate it on the drive washer around the outside of the friction washer. Place the retaining washer over the shaft and up against the wavy washer and the friction washer. Screw the castle nut onto the motor rotor shaft. This should be tightened down and then backed off and then tightened to 48 inch-pounds with a torque wrench. Note, over or under torquing can damage the bearing. Push the cotter pin through the hole in the motor shaft and bend it around the castle nut to secure. Check to make sure there is no vertical play in the motor rotor shaft. Turn the disposer upright and check for up and down play and that the unit spins freely. Insert the shredder by lining up the 2 slots on the 1 and 2 horsepower models or the 4 tabs on the 3 and 5 horsepower models with the motor housing bolt holes. Tap the shredder into place. Remove the center of the gasket so that the inside diameter matches the shredder size. Place the center gasket on top of the motor housing. Reattach the top housing to the motor housing. Be sure to align the tabs on the top housing with the holes in the gasket and motor housing. Secure with the 8 top housing bolts. Reattach the electrical wiring and the drain plumbing and check for proper operation. For additional questions, contact Salvajor's Service Department. For notifications on new content on Salvajor's YouTube channel, please like and subscribe. Thank you for choosing Salvajor.